to him, and he says, I'm going to have to take your position away. And we actually never, if you notice, we never really find out whether the charges are true. We don't go into that. Maybe the manager figures they are because he doesn't argue. But he decides he better figure out what to do. Because if he doesn't have a job, he needs to have some way to live. And he's not strong enough for manual labor. And he doesn't want to beg. So he comes up with a plan to make some friends who will take care of him. And the plan is to go around and forgive significant portions of the debts that are owed to his master. He says, how much do you owe? 100 jars of olive oil? He says, quickly, make that 50. So, ingratiating that person to him. I don't know how the master's going to feel about it, right? Well, we do. And it's very surprising. When the master finds out what the manager has done, he says, way to go! Wow, good job. You're very smart. He commends him. He doesn't complain. He's already dismissed him for squandering his property. It seems like this is more squandering, and yet he praises him. It makes no sense. And then Jesus goes on to say that Jesus' followers should learn to be more shrewd like that. And if that's not confusing enough, Jesus says, I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth. What? He says, whoever is faithful in little is faithful in much. Whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest in much. As if that's a good thing. If you then have not been faithful with dishonest wealth, who will entrust you to true riches? What do we make of this? Well, the first thing that I want to bring up is just to point out that when Jesus' followers heard this, they had a very different context for understanding it. We hear about it as a story and we put it in our own context, and it means one thing. But in that moment in time, the wealthy landowners were becoming wealthy on the backs of the poor workers. They had swallowed up the land. They had taken the peasants' land away and hired them back to till the land with a great return. It wasn't fair, right? So and what if their crops didn't do well? That didn't mean they didn't owe the landowner. They just had to work harder the next year. And they were getting deeper and deeper in debt and having to sell more of their land. It was a situation that was balanced toward the wealthy against the poor. So that was all in the mind of the people that heard this story. And I wonder if the way they heard it, I wonder if when the manager went around and said, how much do you owe? And the person said, I owe 100 jars of olive oil. I'm never going to get out of this crushing debt. It's not fair. I am oppressed, right? That's the undertone. So when the manager says, quickly, make that 50, maybe he's not, I've always thought he's cheating his master of 50 jars of olive oil, but maybe he's actually biasing toward justice. Maybe. Just different ways of thinking about it that would have been just normal for those people in that moment. Another point that I want to make is that this is not, as Paul has said, they're all meant to blow our minds. This is not the only parable that is outlandish. It's just that some of them we've just gotten so used to, and they have enough parts that we warm up to that we kind of don't always pay attention to the crazy parts of them. For example, the one that comes right before this story in the Gospel of Luke is the prodigal son. Or as one of my seminary professors like to call it, the story of the prodigal father. Because the father is not very smart in this story, really, right? In that story, the younger son, whom he must know is not very mature and not ready to make wise decisions, asks for half of the family inheritance. And that father says, sure, here you go. So, surprise, surprise, he goes off and squanders it. And then, when the son has run out of money, and there's a famine, and he finds himself starving to death, wishing that he could have as much to eat as the pigs that he's feeding. Remember the story? He says to himself, just like our manager, he has a little talk with himself, and he says, you know, even in my house, even the slaves have enough to eat. I'm going to go back home, and I'm going to say, I'm not worthy to be your son, but maybe you could hire me